Without women's unpaid labor, there is no society.
Yeah. When our parents were growing up, it was still a class thing, but it was easier by all accounts for like one person to be out in the outside world making an income and to support a family back home.
Yeah. I guess as I don't like the idea of women being forced back into the home, I don't like women being forced into the world to the detriment of their mental health and their children's upbringing.
They do enjoy consuming it is that it's escapism, that it is a fantasy.
So surely the question is not why are right-wing social media accounts trying to brainwash women back into the home, but what is the reality of modern life for women, particularly young women, that their escapist fantasy would be the simplicity of the idea of family life. Is that not interesting to people? I mean, obviously it's to us because we're talking about it, but clearly it's not interesting to The Guardian, The Independent. So how does feminism solve the issue of motherhood?
Which is tricky.
It's crunchy.
But it's real crunchy because you think, well, what's the solution? Hi, I'm Christina Rhodes.
And I'm Tempest Rose.
We are two millennial women 4 decades in.
We're revisiting the culture that made us with a little more hindsight.
And a lot less bullshit.
We've made our own rules.
Built our own spotlights.
And we're here to speak our minds without playing dumb.
And without playing nice. Tell me, Tempest, would you rather be at home baking bread?
My famous love of baking.
500-pound negligee.
Yes, with my full camera crew.
Exactly.
And the nanny holding my delightful children off camera.
What do you think about tradwives?
I'm so excited to talk about tradwives because there is the discussion of tradwives themselves and the reaction to the tradwife phenomenon, which really makes my blood boil.
Yeah.
So I'm here for all of this. Would you like to, or shall I try and explain the phenomenon of the tradwife in terms of social media? Because that's why it's back in the news, isn't it?
Sure. I mean, I suppose my understanding of it, as somebody who's not on social media that much, is that there's been a large amount of content coming out suddenly that many people see as idolizing sort of the stay-at-home, often sort of gets related to slow life concept of you're not working full-time outside the home, you're taking care of your children, your family, and you do oftentimes like you're making bread or you're living a sort of what feels like to many people a existence from another time.
Yeah. I guess
Is that fair?
Yeah, no, I think you encapsulate that very well. It's the fantasy of the picket fence almost, isn't it? But it's all very farm coded, isn't it? Like we go and feed the chickens and we collect the eggs and then I use the eggs to make my delicious pies for my wonderful, beautiful, well-behaved children who are driving me up the wall and I'm happy and content. Yeah, so this has been all over social media and there's been so here's my problem with the reaction to the tradwife phenomenon before we even get into what tradwives are and what they stand for. I feel that if this was a reversal and we were talking about like men desperate to return to like whittling wood for the fire and building a tree house for his beautiful children in the garden as he reads them bedtime stories and, just kind of, again, returning to this slow, rural, very traditional, more small C conservative way of life, newspapers would be full of interviewing men and understanding what the fascination is. And gosh, isn't it all so interesting and what they must be thinking and what this says about modernity? Because as women, other than to call it, which one of the more kind of Guardian-y podcasts I listened to, this female journalist literally just dismissed it with, oh yeah, well, that's just, was it pornography for the right wing? And then didn't say a single word about it. Or the other thing, and so I've heard some dismissals to that effect within the kind of media class or amongst reactions I see online and even like within artistic circles is that women who enjoy this, women who are promoting this are selling out the sisterhood as some kind of anti-feminist evil witches that we should burn at the stake. And I actually think that there's a lot to unpack here. And so I'm excited for us to do so. But there's a sexism immediately to me in dismissing this whole thing as this nonsense fantasy that clearly is either totally negative or we shouldn't even give any thought to. Because, of course, women's desires and view of life and place in the world is not considered as important as men's. And so the whole phenomenon actually is very fascinating. So I'm glad that we decided to talk about it.
I think I would agree with all of that. And I think it's the other part of it that I find really fascinating and excited to talk about is what feels to me as a level of hypocrisy sometimes. Now, there are some influencers who have become almost like the face of trad wives, who don't call themselves that, who don't consider themselves part of this movement. But it is, to me, there's interesting things to unpick about what's actually going on there.
Yeah, you brought up something very interesting about how this content gets consumed and actually the people who watch it, on what basis they're watching it.
Yeah, so one of the statistics that I read was saying that, if you look at women under the age of 30, there is actually only a small percentage, about 8%, who would choose to trade their life with the content that they're consuming. Another statistic was saying that, a majority, about 60% of women that they polled, said that they think that this trend is actually quite toxic for women. So I think there is like a knowledge or concern about wanting to step into this life, but that they see it as the way that they do enjoy consuming it is that it's escapism, that it is a fantasy, which is what you called it before. And that's nice to watch.
Yes. So surely the question is not why are right-wing social media accounts trying to brainwash women back into the home, but what is the reality of modern life for women, particularly young women, that their escapist fantasy would be the simplicity of the idea of family life? Is that not interesting to people? I mean, obviously it's to us because we're talking about it, but clearly it's not interesting to The Guardian, The Independent, other than to Ballerina Farms, of course, went super viral. And indicated, well, there was a lot to unpack there and people already did that. So, but you've previously definitely raised an interesting critique of the phenomenon itself, which is actually these women are working because this is content creation.
Yeah, I think this whole idea that as if you have some magical fly on the wall camera into their New York penthouse or their farm in Utah, that just everything looks perfect and they just like wake up and, lead this life. But we know that's not true. And for many women, they are actually making a significant portion of, their household income off of creating this fantasy. And I think there's a question mark around how much the content creators themselves actually believe in what has sort of become attached to versus how much they're just enterprising young women who can see a niche in the market and think, well, I could do that.
Yeah.
I can create that content.
They're catering to demand. So yeah, like
running
let's talk about the demand. I can totally understand the fantasy. Again, we're going to talk about the reality and how we feel about it.
Sure.
And if we run the world, maybe one day we will.
Yeah.
How we might try and take the positives and mitigate some of the negatives. Working life, particularly for young people, is tough. You work long hours. Opportunities for advancement, I think, are smaller. It's much harder for young people to get on the housing ladder. Wages have been stagnant forever. And most people either are me or hate their jobs. We're lucky. And maybe thinking about it, when you think of like the cultural class, which is what term that we used in our class episode, like people who work in media, people who work in informing how we think about society are probably doing their dream jobs.
Yeah.
We are very lucky. We've got to live in industries that were our fantasies at one point to get involved in. But that's not the reality for a lot of people. So if you're a young woman, work is a grind, wages are rubbish. You've been sold this idea of like going into the world, having it all. And even if, let's say you're a mother, you've had your child, you still have to work because you need the household income. Most of that is also being spent on the childcare for you to go to work in the first place. We're constantly talking about how hard it is to sustain a family on one income. It's almost impossible nowadays. The fantasy, it is a fantasy, escapism of waking up on your beautiful farm away from the hustle, away from the grind, where actually maybe you get to spend time with your children for longer than, but get up, get dressed, get the fucking Weetabix in your mouth, get in the car, get to school, get to nursery, get to the office. You're tired, you're stressed out, you're worn out. And then when you get home, you pick up your second job. I understand this fantasy. I'm not sure the working world has given much to young women.
No, I completely agree. I think it's that, to me, it is that like 2-job scenario, because the reality is that we live in a world where, yes, we have made massive advances for women, but, truth be told, if I polled, the majority of my friends, the woman is still the person who does the majority of the house care and the majority of looking after the children. And oftentimes still, she might go to work, but her job probably pays a little bit less than her husband's. Not all cases by any means. And I have, 2 of my closest friends are, the woman is the one who works and the man stays at home. But it is seen as an outlier in their community. And it is basically an outlier in the US and the UK too, I would say. But I think and the fact that childcare is so expensive in the UK, that, you literally are signing up to do this job, which, like you pointed out, is probably not your dream job. For what? So that you can then be tired when you come home and you can have made basically like zeroed out your income, but you can claim that you have this other part of your life. I mean, I just wish that we could find a way to give women the opportunity for choice and for fulfillment that didn't require them sort of sacrificing their whole living existence, if that makes sense.
Yeah. How much of this is a problem of the lack of respect for the role of the mother in society?
In terms of how it's being, like the popularity it's being consumed, or when you say the backlash. Problem, the backlash?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. What do you think? Let's give that a minute.
I think that if you don't really consider motherhood a valued job, which, we don't. Actually, I'm not sure we do, to be honest. We don't really value women's domestic labor. We don't factor it in as work.
Yeah.
So if you don't value it as work, then I can understand.
I wonder if it's less an issue.
I asked this nightmare question, I can't even answer it.
I wonder if it's less about that I actually completely agree with you. I don't think that our society values motherhood and the work that women do within the home nearly enough, not even close. But I wonder if part of the sort of negativeness around the tradwife movement is that, women did work. Our mothers were part of a generation that worked so hard to have the choice and the right to be outside of the home, to then look at content that fantasizes not having a job, not being out in the working world, and just being sort of back to this, previous stereotype, which was a stereotype. Like my grandmother was working class. Every woman in her family worked. They just also did all the childcare. So they had to have 2 jobs, basically. But, it was more of a privilege. But it is this concept of sort of like what life would have been like back then. And so I think I can understand why people get a little bit on guard with it and they're nervous about what are we saying here? Like, are we actually just like suggesting women should all quit their jobs and go back to being in the home, and that's a good thing? Or, I also really wonder how much the tradwife movement, how much the content creators should be held responsible for it, or even should really be like included in it. Do you know what I mean? I feel like I don't know, if you create content like that, are you responsible for the message you're putting out there? Or are you just a business person who's doing your thing?
I mean, I think it gets tricky when you extrapolate that out on a broader sense. I mean, people make content. We have to ask questions about I suppose, I'm not comparing tradwives to Andrew Tate, but you're in a scenario where you're like, people consume this content, but the content is a symptom.
Yes.
I suppose.
Yes.
If that makes sense as a response to your question.
I mean, I do actually think we should hold them accountable. I think you are responsible for the messaging you put out into the world. But yeah, this is a side tangent question.
It's an interesting question. I suppose if you use a freedom of speech example, you can say whatever you like. So someone used the example the other day, you could say we should all riot in the streets. But if you say we should all riot in the streets at 6:00, the guns are in the cupboard on the 3rd Street on the left, this is a combination to the key code, then you run into the problem of inciting violence. And so you would have to make some kind of barrier, I think, at which point what responsibility is it that you're accepting for your content? Do you know what I mean?
For sure. I also do wonder that when it comes to tradwives, and I did not look into this specifically before the episode, but I'm curious about how many of them call themselves trad wives versus how many of them, have a little empire, a little business, creating content which just glamorizes something where they're a beautiful person doing something that just looks soft and lovely and nice, but they're not actually ever calling themselves a trad wife or don't consider themselves a trad wife.
I think that this, the honesty of that these women are business women, a lot of them, they're content creators, either with their partner or on their own, or, I'm sure each case is going to be slightly different. Because I view it more as a symptom, I'm maybe slightly less interested, not that I'm not happy to talk about it, and then the sort of the reality of what the content creators are living versus what it says about society at large. I totally take your point about, I think there is this terror in the negative reaction to the trad wife, which is like, you want us to all people? Because that has been a reality for women that was incredibly dangerous, toxic, damaging. If I'm going to take a pro-trad wife stance, I would say that some of that is also, I guess this is what I meant earlier, rooted in this can't possibly be a valid and fulfilling experience for you. And
interesting.
Yes, in terms of the content created, because by the very fact of their existence, they are not living a trad wife lifestyle. They're sort of running a television show about the fancy of a trad wife lifestyle. But sometimes I worry feminism is a motherhood problem, which is that the reality is, as we've discussed in another episode, the majority of women want to be mothers, and the majority of mothers like and want to spend time with their children. And it is good for children to spend time with their mothers. I mean, plus other people in their family. I'm not saying just mothers, obviously. And I think the paranoia, understandably, given its roots of certain pockets of feminism to I'm not going back on a kitchen, stop making me, to then demonize women who actually want to say, do you know what? I don't want to hustle in a job I hate. If I could, I would stay at home. My job would be raising my children, and that's fine. And people will be like, oh, well, yeah, because it's their choice, blah, blah, blah. Because, liberal feminism is obsessed with choice as the absolute ultimate. But I actually don't think in the reactions that I've seen, they are saying, that's that woman's choice and good for her. They're saying, the witch. Yeah, you're letting us all down, you son of a bitch. But I despite the fact that I've decided not to be one, my 40-year-old himself, I've much more softened to the idea that there is something meaningful about having the breathing space and the time and the space to bring up your children in this slow life cycle. I mean, I'm sure it doesn't feel slow when you're in. I'm sure bringing up children is very chaotic. And some of that is a reaction, obviously, to this hyper kind of capitalism, productivity world. And the reality is that the working world was made by men, designed for men. It is not really often compatible. I always feel like you're always having to fight against the grain. I'm going to guess, mother's going to feel free to correct me, of putting yourself into a working world designed for men and then having to come home and do the child raising. And I suspect there is a feeling that it's not enough just to be with your children. There's something wrong with you as a woman. And I don't like that.
Oh, completely. And I mean, for the record, if I had children, and we can talk about my own personal life with my dogs later, but I absolutely, if the option was available to me and I was in a good partnership, which I think is one of the other things that we can touch on, then absolutely. Then I don't want to be working 2 full-time jobs. I think it's a beautiful thing to spend time with your children. I think absolutely I can understand the appeal, but there's some really heavy potential pitfalls with sort of supporting this concept, basically. And one of them is around vulnerability. One of them is around the ability for, the average husband, let's say, to support a family on a single income. And yeah, I mean, those are just 2 to talk about. And I think so. We can talk about the financial vulnerability first.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in my mind, and you were actually the one who brought this up to me, and then we talked about it a bit more. But it's if you go back into the home, obviously, you're giving up your job. You may not be giving up your bank account, but you are giving up your ability to earn an income. And so you are reliant on hoping that your marriage goes well into the future, that your husband doesn't decide to leave you at some point, that you don't decide to leave your husband at some point, and end up in an acrimonious situation where you have no money and you may not have any like access to having a job where you can earn a good living anytime soon. And again, what I find interesting about it is that we live in a society where we have a population deficit problem where the state needs little babies to be made. You have women fantasizing about wanting to be full-time moms, and yet you aren't doing anything to sort of, provide solutions for these, real potential pitfalls. And I'm not sure what the state's role is in that. I think that my jury is out on that, but I think it's an interesting talking point.
Yeah. I think we're very much in alignment on this, because that, for me, that's the major worry I have with women rebuying into a fantasy that previously has placed them in, like you say, an incredibly vulnerable position. We're talking about financing immediately. Yes, you have no money. If you have no money and no access to money, you have no freedom. You have no escape mechanism. You have no ability to get yourself to safety, to leave, for example, if you're in a situation that requires that. I never want to go. I feel like maybe she doesn't need saying, but just clarifying, although I have a lot of sympathy with the trad wife movement, I never ever want women to be back in that situation again. So then we do come into this discussion with the state. And again, maybe when I was like, do we have a problem with not valuing mothers? Because if you think about, I do have sympathy, although I don't know a lot about it, for this idea of wages for housework, wages for mothering. If we don't value motherhood as a society, and we're reaping the negative benefits of it in the declining birth rates, if we don't value mothers in society, we don't consider it a real job. We don't consider it as something that the state should support and pay for. The friction then is, of course, the breakdown of the family with regards to making everyone reliant on the state. How much should state in truth? And we do have, I'd be interested to know the current situation with child benefits. So in the UK, we have child benefit. There's always an argument over whether or not it should be means tested, and who it gets paid to, and therefore access to those bank accounts. Like, I don't know, is there a situation where every child, regardless of financial background, child benefit is paid to the mother in a bank account that only she is allowed to access? I think it's going to be almost impossible to totally eradicate manipulation, abuse, coercion, but you can take steps to try and minimize harm. Like, I would be in favor of something like that, so that woman always has the ability to be autonomous, to leave, to be secure from financial abuse from her husband, to lock her in a situation that she's not happy with, and also to accrue money. So I guess it's not really child benefit, it's mother benefit, isn't it? Whereby you've raised your children, you got £20,000 in the bank now. If you want to spend that or more, like potentially on retraining, on upskilling, on investing in something, I'm all for that.
Totally. I would say totally. There are parts of that I completely agree with. I'm really not sure where I sit, because I think that it's a real problem that the state has. So therefore, we all have it. I mean, if you care about the longevity of this country. And I really value women and the work that mothers do in the home and in raising children, and in the importance of that. I do have like a natural concern over sort of just dishing out money. I would love to see, and I'm not sure how you do it, but I'd love to see there be like more access to resources, right? So rather than giving a woman the money to go do these things, allow it to be totally free to all women, that you can retrain, that there are programs available to you. So it's not about you can choose that money, and then the state has to be concerned about whether or not it's going to your husband anyways, or, or being spent on something that's not helping you. But I don't know, but then you're an employee of the state. I don't know. There's a lot of like complicated things there. And obviously there are, some traditional families who people, who live by this sort of what we consider more traditional breakdown of gender roles. And they have a nice partnership. They view it as a partnership. They behave like a partnership. But you just got to be lucky as a woman. You just got to be so lucky to have that. And I don't think that we should be, relying on luck. And and men to never change their minds over the course of 20 or 30 or 40 years.
Or to be respectful of the sacrifices that the mother of their children has made. There's no easy solutions to all of this. I was wondering about your suggestion that there's resources that women can access. And I certainly think that's really interesting. Maybe if you have children, you should never pay for higher education. That should be funded by the state.
Good one.
I guess you're reliant on, and all of these things are going to have problems, aren't they? You're reliant on the allowance of her ability to go to these classes, depending on how controlling the environment is. That is different to, I need to access 20 grand one time immediately and get myself the fuck out of here.
Sure.
Versus every week I can go and do a master's in cryptocurrency I can become a multi-billionaire. But isn't my suggestion, obviously it's not, I literally popped it up to my head. It's very open to critique. Hopefully we can throw around some more ideas.
Sure.
Sort of the state version equivalent of when couples have gotten divorced and women have successfully argued, I believe, that they are owed compensation from their husband's finances, alimony, due to the job of raising the children. And that is a sort of retirement package. And I get that, but not all women marry rich men.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with alimony. I think it's a valuable thing. It doesn't always apply to mothers. It's actually, you can not have any children and still require alimony. It's more about that you've been living a certain life, and so you shouldn't be sent into destitution just because you're no longer together, is my understanding of it. So it's not actually necessarily tied to the work that you were doing as a mother. For better or for worse.
Get off your ass and make your own money if you've done raising children. Have I said something unspeakable there?
I don't know. I gotta agree with you.
But at the feminist state for saying that. Get your own job.
But also one of the obvious things to me, and I'm sure somebody who works in the government will tell me there's a reason it's not obvious and it's so expensive, but childcare is so expensive, and there are, dating back for, well into the last century, women have cried out and been asking for, as we've moved more and more into insular single family dwelling homes and, more insular societies, asking for access to more free childcare, more social childcare, socialization with other moms for free. This seems to me like a no-brainer. Why are you not? If I would be much more compelled to have a child and to stay at home and, to do a great job of raising them, if I felt that I was getting some support in being able to have little Susie be at daycare for free for even 4 hours a day, 2 hours a day.
Well, we do have in the UK, I can't
free
argue
daycare.
that it's, consistently applied.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Is that
you get up to 40 hours free daycare for your children. I don't know if it's means tested or not, but we do have, which I think was brought in more stuff was brought in relatively recently, provisions of access to childcare for free. It obviously can be much better, but it is a nice socialist policy that we do have in the UK.
Definitely. So that's worth looking into for sure. In the US, it doesn't exist.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
So you guys don't have maternity pay, is that right?
You don't. Well, I think
you have state maternity pay.
Yes, and you don't, I believe. And you'd also have a much shorter sort of requirement for time off after giving birth before you are expected to come back to work.
I mean, I'm sure for you as an individual, but as a country perspective here, that's insanity.
I know.
Especially if you are worried about women not having children.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I don't know. I feel resources and more childcare resources would be maybe two of the ways to help encourage people to, I don't know, are we asking people to live this fantasy if they want it? Are we encouraging it?
I'm all for more childcare provision, but it doesn't really answer the question of, I don't want to go to work.
Yeah.
Stay at home and raise my children. I was asking a friend of mine about this who has a young child and she's in her 40s. And I also think, which maybe some women can't understand until they get to this stage of life, she's like, and she's done hustle culture for ages. She's like, I want to work maybe 2 or 3 times a month, and then I want to be with my daughter when she's little because I want to be there for the milestones of her life. And so if I could afford to, I would choose that for a period of time. And what I enjoy, because I think, is there a finality to some of this idea of tradwifism? a way of talking about it, which I actually find much more positive, is that you go through stages in life as a woman. Like I am militantly passionate about educating girls, educating women, going into the world, having the time in your life where you get to have a purpose, whether that's a career, whatever it is, but that's outside the home, that's in society. Then if you want to, and again, like you should never be forced, but you then go through a process of your time, potentially when your children are little, whereby the state, or our circumstances, our society, it's probably a better word, allows you to take your foot off the gas and understands that raising children well is of benefit to society, not just on an individual and a family basis. And allows the space to do that. And then your children are grown up and you might probably feel again, you want to then do something else with purpose in life, whether that's go back to work or it might be more community based. And I like this idea of stages in life for women because we have biological cycles. For me, women's lives lend themselves more to thinking cyclically rather than traditionally what, I know this isn't the case anymore, but you become the company man at 18 and then you retire and nothing else happens in the middle.
No, I completely agree. I think one of the things that gives me like a little bit of cause for concern that I've seen sort of in these posts and from some of these influencers is this concept that unlike what you're saying, that you can go out of the home, you can start in life by like going out of the home, getting a purpose that is external, that you should really hold true to the fact that your children and your family are your purpose.
Yeah.
And it's obviously has a lot of deep religious connotation. And I think I can understand why some people, would feel, particularly if you've grown up in a religious household, why that is part of your purpose. But we also had the 50s where mental health, as you've brought up when we were chatting about this, was such a problem because if you make women define themselves as they have no purpose themselves, their purpose is solely tied to other people and for the benefit of this family unit, then we know that is like not a good road to go down.
Yeah, you're totally right. We run the experiment and now you're re-bringing it up. Of course, a lot of the women, so, again, we're talking about the feminine mystique, this idea of the 1950s housewives. A lot of those women, because it was a kind of class phenomenon as well, did go to university, but they weren't interested in learning. They were there to meet a husband so they could go home and they would retire to the house, and their whole lives were built around and lived vicariously through their husband and their children. And it sent them insane. This is the concept of the medicated 50s housewife again. So yeah, it's a valid concern. The critique of the feminine mystique is this kind of class argument that I think a lot of people felt that she was demonizing motherhood as dehumanizing. Whereas for other women in society that weren't privileged enough to live in their beautiful, giant, big white picket fence houses, motherhood was very affirming. But it's the vicariousness. They become almost non-people.
Yeah.
Which it's terrifying. It is that Stepford wife concept. You cease to exist. You have no desires, no opinions of your own. You're locked. I think we've also got to remember we live in a different culture now. They didn't have social media for all its ills, but women read women's magazines, which talked about child rearing and making the garden look pretty. There's this whole thing of like, oh, women don't want to know about politics. Women aren't interested in world affairs. So they were also kept stupid by the culture.
Oh, completely. And I would disagree with what you just slipped out and said, and I would wager that you don't actually agree. I don't think that a lot of women back in the 50s didn't have any interest in what they were learning, particularly if you had studied hard to get into a good school. Yes, you might also want a wealthy husband, but I doubt you just lost all concern for learning.
Well, actually, no, really? Because she conducted a whole series of interviews, both with college professors. Again, we're sort of talking about a niche pocket of society. That there was this. The way that she describes it's a really interesting book. You can read it, you can listen to it on Audible. Girls, I suppose they were young women, had this mental block where they stopped themselves getting too interested. Because what was the point? Because once you got married, you didn't work. And actually, I suppose, is this a period where once you were married, not necessarily illegal, but it was societally unacceptable? This is the same in the UK. You're engaged, you'll get married, you'll stop working.
Yes, of course.
You'll stay at home. So there was this kind of culture of I'm only really dabbling here with my learning.
But I would question how much that is environmental. And maybe that's just like
the
way
to... I'm not suggesting it's like biologically innate, of course.
Yeah, I feel like that's also, to me, just hearing that story, it feels like, a woman, like any man, is thinking about power, and they're thinking about the game of life and how to win it. And if you think, well, this is like something I can spend a load of time on, but it's not going to help me get ahead or do, achieve the thing that I want to do, then what's the point? But that's not necessarily to say that if they were allowed to have that too, that they wouldn't want it. If that makes sense.
Have what?
Like have education. If you were allowed to have like this purpose beyond the home, then and still have the option to go and raise your children and do everything else, then I don't know. Maybe what I'm saying doesn't make sense, but...
It makes sense. I'm not sure it's entirely compatible with the phenomenon of the time, but I guess I'm comparing life and then I'm comparing what the book says.
Yeah,
so I do totally get what you're saying. I suppose one of the red flags people raise is, so the generation of the feminine mystique women who went into the home, their grandmothers had fought for the vote, in the world, women's suffrage. And so it was quite strange to them to watch their daughters and granddaughters, having been given these rights or won these rights, to choose to retreat from the world. I guess you could make the same argument.
I know, we're not talking about that now.
Yeah, like with girls, I suppose the fantasy, women watching perhaps their mothers struggle with the burden of everything, the working world, the home world. Think, fuck that shit.
Yeah.
Again, I guess it's not that I'm sympathetic to it, but the dismissal and the demonization, I'm not feeling this for you, but that I see in certain feminist circles against these women totally misses what they're yearning for.
Oh, completely. And again, for the record, I absolutely understand the desire to, to like, if you have small children, to have this moment with them, even to when they're older children, to like really to have that too. And I think, there's alternate universes where I can imagine myself wanting to be a homemaker, to like get a lot of like joy out of creating something wonderful and beautiful. And I think, for your family, I just think there are these potential pitfalls. For me, there's these potential pitfalls, which I don't think have easy answers, right? Around supporting this concept of women going back into the home. I think there's really good reasons for it. I totally understand the reason why you would want to do it. But again, and like maybe it's not society's place to be protecting women from partners who aren't going to share the bank account, or do you know what I mean? It's just a complicated question.
I feel like we might disagree with that. That penalty justice episode.
No, I just think it's a complicated issue, right?
So how does feminism solve the issue of motherhood?
I don't know.
Solve it today. I know. We can share ourselves through some ideas out there, and let us know in the comments, because here's the problem, I guess, as you see it. There's a group of women who want to be at home raising their children. To do so requires money being earned from a source that is not her. Therefore, she is placed at the vulnerability of where that income comes from. We know, unfortunately, it's quite hard to predict whether you're going to have children with an abusive asshole, whether your partner is going to be a good father, a good husband, a good provider, and support you in your networks. We know from previous human history that this isn't something you could assume is going to be the case. But I don't like the idea of women being forced back into the home, I don't like women being forced into the world to the detriment of their mental health and their children's upbringing.
No, it's a tricky one. And one of the other tricky layers is a economic concept, which I am not an expert in, but I will just raise it to be controversial, if nothing else.
I love it.
And it is controversial.
Yeah.
That, when our parents were growing up, it was still a class thing, but it was easier, by all accounts, for one person to be out in the outside world making an income and to support a family back home.
Yeah.
It wasn't easy, but it was easier.
Yeah.
And part of why, one group of thought about why it is harder for that to happen now is because women did join the workforce. So now there's twice as big of a pool of people to choose from. I don't think it's like even, but do you know what I mean? It's a larger pool of people to choose from. And it's harder to get a job. It's kept wages down. And therefore, we're in a situation where it is it's more difficult to have even if you want your husband to be out there and you want to stay at home, it's not something that's available to a large portion of the population.
Yeah.
It's a fantasy in that way too.
Yeah.
Which is tricky.
It's crunchy.
But it's real crunchy because you think, well, what's the solution? I don't know. I'm not sure I do want the state providing just blanket money. I'm not sure. I definitely don't want to be in a situation where women are being forced in any direction. I feel like what we fought for was this choice over this choice over your future, right? But I agree with you too. I don't want to force. If you have a family, you want to be raising that family full time. That's a beautiful, wonderful thing that should be respected. There should be a way for that to have compensation. I just don't know what it looks like.
Yeah. I suppose in terms of, yes, you talk about history of capitalism, history of the labor force, it is unprecedented that the number of women have entered the workforce at the time that they did. And it's an uncomfortable truth that, I don't know what the follow-on from that is, but it is the reality of one of the things that happened that meant that wages became depressed. We're all depressed.
Yeah.
I'm less worried about when it comes to the state has limited funds. That's a fact of life. We have endless money. Where those funds go, for me personally, I have less issue with them going towards mothers and the family than I have with them potentially going in different directions. I'm not sure if those directions are, but the state has lots of things to pay for. Because for me, it's not just what benefits that individual or that family unit. There is a benefit to society of having children well raised. As in, the time, the resources, some of that can be done in terms of, access to childcare. I guess even if it's not that because the mother isn't there, but this idea of the mental health of the mother, the well-being of the family, trying to put back some of these community connections that we lost through the Industrial Revolution because people tended to move away from family networks. So is there a cost-benefit analysis of this? Has someone done it? There is a benefit to society to having happy families, happy children, happy, relaxed mothers. I put my money where my mouth is on. I'm happy to spend money on that.
I'm happy to spend money on resources to achieve those things. My jury is out on just straight cash payments, but there must be a solution. Not that I think anyone is spending too much trying to solve it, though.
I have this theory. Well, some people hate this. No, I think they'll get it.
Who knows?
Find out. Great. Saddle in. So obviously, through social media, our worlds have gotten a lot bigger. We absorb information from parts of society in the world that we will potentially never come into, never see in real life. And our brains are not designed to take in and to care about. What's their statistic? We're designed to care about our immediate community. Yeah. Now we care about, including me. So, we can be driven to distraction, being fed terrible things happening in the world that we cannot do anything about.
Yeah.
I sometimes worry that actually, let me dust off my tinfoil hat. There's actually an imperative to saturating people's feeds with horrible stuff that they cannot do anything about. It totally sucks up your time, your mental health. It's destabilizing, it's dehumanizing, it's horrifying because, a lot of the time you are seeing real things, horrible things happen in the world that we hear about. And it's, the natural instinct is to care about them and to get upset about them. But sometimes I, in my darker moments, think, well, how convenient. What if that time, if everybody who consumed something horrifying that they literally cannot do anything about online wrote, obviously being a bit simplistic here, but wrote to their government and council and demanded proper childcare, that would get done tomorrow because politicians like to stay in power.
Yeah.
They need to be voted for by their communities. And contacting your MP is one of the ways that you can affect change, but it doesn't work on an individualistic basis. MPs have to be getting lots of phone calls, lots of letters, but because social media has meant that we're so consumed of the problems of the world in a broader extent, to which are not less important, but we cannot do anything about, I sometimes think, well, it's very convenient, isn't it? Because it stops us focusing on what we can solve right here, right now.
Yeah. I mean, you do not need to tell me about the ills of social media. I just think I mean, I think in general, things like TikTok I realize that the younger population goes to TikTok to try to find the answers to things. But to me, TikTok is not the answer for anything. TikTok is part of the problem. Instagram is part of the problem. And yeah, absolutely. You know, if you're just absorbing something, anything, it's not good for you to be doing that all day, whether it's miniature cows or on a much more extreme side. They are real cute.
Super joyful.
Oh yeah, but I do hear your point. I feel like we've gone lots of different places with this trad wife.
See, it's worthy of examination,
it is
people.
Worthy of examination. I mean, it is absolutely worthy of examination. And I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of it.
Well, if you have any brainwaves about how we can support good parenting as a society, I want to hear it, because we haven't come to the solution. And I feel like we still don't respect the work, the unpaid work that women do that keeps the wheels turning in our society. Without women's unpaid labor, there is no society.
Yeah, that's very good food for thought. Maybe Tempest will solve it and will win the Nobel Peace Prize.
I've picked my outfit already.
Great. On that, we'll see you next time.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. We love making this podcast and we really want it to grow. So if you enjoyed listening to us,
please like, subscribe, give us a 5-star rating. Also, feel free to comment, DM us, open up a conversation. The whole point of this podcast is to be in support of having open lines of communication and debate, and we would love to hear from you.
Listen to the sirens.
Woo!